Hey guys, how's it going? It's Kire here with another Diablo 4 video. And in today's video, what I want to do is I want to simplify the building process for a Barbarian. There's so many different builds you can go. There's Hoda, there's Whirlwind, there's like the Mace version of Whirlwind, there's Rupture, Deathblow. There's all these different builds of a Barbarian, and I think for me that's the funnest part of the game, is changing builds and trying different ways of playing the game, tackling the same content, or making a different build that excels in one thing but doesn't excel in another. I think that is the best part. It is incredibly complicated to figure out each different stat requirement for each piece of gear. So what I want to do is I want to simplify and talk about the things that are the core things you're looking for on certain pieces. You'll be able to use this as a foundation regardless of your build from there to make it to where, okay, regardless of what I'm doing, I always know I need this for my build. You could build a couple pieces, move a couple pieces around, and then it will also let you know that when you got your best in slot for multiple builds. So that is going to be the goal here in this video. And I think the best way to do that is going to be going on to this build planner here. I think Maxroll has a fantastic version of a build planner. You get way more specific, and it has all the affixes and everything, as you'll see through here, but I want to go through the core pieces of most builds. First thing, absolutely, you're looking at is going to be cooldown reduction. This is by far the best thing on the headpiece. I wouldn't even look at a headpiece without cooldown reduction. And then also keep in mind, you get more cooldown reduction as you level it up. This would be the max roll at 14.6. Then I would say this is going to be build specific, but you can get these three ranks to your skills. So if you're going like a Deathbow build or a Rupture build, this is going to be the best in slot. The next after that, these are nice bonuses. I think there's going to be some that are better than others. I would go with total armor. I think total armor is fantastic. I would say strength is really good too. And then maximum fury. These are going to be my favorite ones that if you pull these kind of things on your headpiece, you're always going to be happy with this regardless of build. And then you could get a little better if you're going like Rupture, you're going, overkill, stuff like that for these ones. Then you could get a little better if you're going for, say, Rupture or Deathblow, or someone figures out a Steel Grasp build that actually cares about a ton of ranks in Steel Grasp. Next, we're going to talk about chest piece. So for most builds on the Barbarian, Rage of Haragoth is an amazing piece, and you could just slot this in if you're going Whirlwind and you have bleeds on. People are kind of moving away from that because you could do so much more damage with another build with the mace, but this is still very good. It's going to be solid in not just Whirlwind, but other builds, because bleeding is such a core part of this mechanic, and also cooldown reduction is just really good. Like, for example, the Rupture build uses this a ton and actually wants to get more lucky hit chance, so you can actually proc this even more, to give you an idea. So this is a very safe option. If you pull this, probably going to be best in slot for most builds. But then let's actually talk about what you can get on a normal chest piece, because there's a ton of survivability here if you actually get the right affixes for it. So I do want to touch on the ranks to skills that you can get here: Rallying Cry, Iron Skin, Challenging Shout, and ranks to Ground Stomp. So I'd say out of all of these, the two best are probably going to be Challenging Shout and Iron Skin. I think these are two fantastic ones. And Rallying Cry, it's okay. And I think these are going to be the class specific things that if I'm running these and I care about these abilities, I'm going to really want to have the ranks of that ability here. And then now let's actually look at the damage reduction things that you can get. These are going to be the things you're really looking for. This is going to be the move. So I like damage reduction. So notice how the damage reduction from distant enemies and damage reduction from close enemies has a way bigger modifier. So I prefer those, to be honest, especially the close enemies one. And then the distant enemies is really not that far away. Like, close enemies is right near you in melee range, and then distant enemies is anywhere else. Having the better modifiers here is nice, but also this is great too. And then also damage reduction when fortified. You could even argue you just skip the normal damage reduction and you go damage reduction when fortified, close enemies, distant enemies. But those are going to be the main things I'm looking for, is having multiple stacks of damage reduction. This is fantastic. Total armor percentage, I think that's really good. Then from there, max life is fantastic, and also your main stat. So you could just go with more strength. So I would say those are going to be the main things. You want to go damage reduction, and then from that damage reduction, you're going to be going into armor percentage, your main stat and strength, all of that. You could even just end the piece of gear with just 4 things of damage reduction: from close enemies, from fortified, just normal damage reduction percentage, and from far away enemies. That can also be a very good piece for your chest. Let's go to the gloves. This one is going to be one that's going to change based on your build. So Gores is obviously going to be the Whirlwind one, but let's say you don't have Whirlwind. The first thing you're going to be looking at is, I would say regardless, because this one also has the ones where you can get ranks up, but the actual base stats are so impactful for this piece of gear because it has so much crit chance on it. This and the rings are the only place to get crit chance. And if you're going to be going Hoda, if you're going to be going these other builds that, well, especially Hoda, I feel like Hoda really needs this crit chance. I would say that's almost even more important than getting the ranks to Hammer of the Ancients. Still, you're going to want both. You're going to want both. And then just keep that in mind, though, that you really want to have that extra crit chance, because this is going to be your biggest point of getting crit chance on your gear. And then from there, because that's going to be build specific, and then also these are abilities here. So these are going to be on your core abilities. So this is going to be super important if you're going to be running any of these type of builds. Whirlwind, if you haven't pulled Gorge yet, you can go Whirlwind, you can go Rend, Double Swing, Upheaval, and Hammer of Ancients. All core skills, all are found on your gloves here. So that's going to be dependent on your build. The actual things that you want other than that are going to be attack speed and I would say lucky hit chance. I think these are going to be the main things you're going to be wanting on your gloves for most builds. And depending on the situation and depending on how lucky or unlucky you are, you can settle with other things. Like there's a ton of things that are good to settle with. Like for example, strength, all stats, dexterity, all those things are going to be really good, but that is going to be for most builds what you're going to be looking to get on the gloves. Keep in mind that this, when it comes to crit chance and lucky hit chance, these are things that can only be found really on your rings and your gloves. And then also the core skill mechanic of getting higher levels there is only found on the gloves too. So that is going to be the main thing you're looking for when you're looking at gloves. Then pants, this is very similar to the chest piece where you're looking for as much damage reduction as possible. Temerity is very good. And depending on the build and depending on which class you have, or if you can actually scale damage off your barrier, by all means, use temerity. But I think what's way better than temerity is going to be just getting a full-on damage reduction. So you go damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from close, damage reduction, and then damage reduction when fortified. You can go all in on that and be totally happy and have more damage reduction than you would have from the barrier that you're getting with temerity. You can also throw in a max life in there. I think that's really good depending on the rolls. When it comes to the actual skills that you could level here, you have charge, leap, war cry, and kick. None of these are really that good to put levels in. And that's the point of the video, where it's like you can change this a little bit to cater to your build. I'm wanting to talk about the core things that you're going to be wanting regardless of build. Total armor's in there. You can throw that in too. So I think that is going to be the best thing for legs, super similar to your chest piece. And then for boots, I think Penitent Greaves is very popular and very good. This one's way more niche, Barbarian only. With the ground step, I want to make something with this work. I think this would be really cool. But for the boots here, we're dodging all resistances because they're trash at this point. The main things you're looking for to tell if you have a good, first of all, it's all going to be speed based. So speed, so movement speed there. Then for specifically Barb, we want Fury cost reduction. This is going to be the thing we want here. So these two, I would be happy with this piece right here. Regardless of build, these two things are going to be a requirement if you want to have a good boot in this game. Then from there, it's all kind of a bonus. Are you wanting to farm faster? Then you're going to want speed when you kill then you're going to want shrine buff duration. I think this is just also a generally nice thing, but it's just not as important as the Fury cost reduction and the movement speed, in my opinion, but still very good. This is going to be something that I believe this is what I have on my boots currently. Then that fourth one is going to be dependent on what you're looking for. So you can go like all stats. You can get your main set and strength. To be honest, I think this would be like a god roll boot right here. You get your strength, you get your shrine duration, you have the Fury cost reduction, and you have the movement speed. But you can also change this to something else, or maybe change the shrine buff duration to something else. Me personally, I don't like the damage reduction when injured. It's too contingent on you being weak. Dodge changes RNG. I don't like that. All stats is totally fine. But the movement speed for 4 seconds after killing elite, I think this is really nice. A really convenient thing when you're farming through and trying to just get stuff done as fast as possible. If you're trying to push as hard as you possibly can, you're probably going to want the strength over that, but it is another option. For your two-hander bludgeoning, these two are going to be specific if you're going like an upheaval burn build. I haven't seen anyone do that yet, but I think this would be really interesting. I want to try it. And then for death blow, this would be nice, but it's base damage here on death blow. So it's kind of, in my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't even get built on a death blow build because it's only doing base damage to enemies. If it can scale up and does crazy damage, sure, that's sick. And it'd be nice to see, but the base damage makes me a little nervous looking at that. So let's actually look at the standard stuff. Basically what you're looking for here is going to be critical strike damage. Then you're going to be, and keep in mind that the implicit modifier for the two-handed bludgeoning is always going to be overpower. You're going to be looking for vulnerable. Then you're going to be looking for, then the next thing is going to be damage to a specific thing. So out of all these, damage to stun, overpower is obviously something you're probably not going to be looking for. Damage to slowed, damage to injured. So notice how damage to injured goes up to 70%, but damage to injured is really not that worth it because it's at the end when they're about to die anyway. Damage to close is 47. So out of all these, here, let me actually, this would be better. So damage 2. So notice how all of these are going to be in the same bucket. So damage to bleeding, damage to crowd control, damage to close. But look at the modifiers. 70% right here on damage to injured enemies. This is something that is the biggest modifier here, but I don't even want it, even if it's at 70%, because it's not going to be applying that much. So then now let's actually look at this one right here on the 28%, damage to bleeding. Okay, depending on the build, they might be bleeding every time, but it's only 28%. So now damage to punishing, so damage to crowd control enemies. Okay, if I take the hamstring thing, I'm always going to be slowing them, but that's only 33%. So is there any of these 47s here that are going to be guaranteed? Stun, probably not. Slowed, maybe, if I take hamstring. And damage to close, which basically every build can do because you're always close and you're a barbarian. So I would say this is the best out of all of these. These other ones are nice depending on your build, but this is going to be the most generally good one you could possibly have. These three here, can't go wrong with this. Then the last slot is going to be probably, in my opinion, going strength. I think that would be my 4 favorite things you can possibly get on a two-handed bludgeoning. Okay, and then here you have the uniques, but let's actually break down this. The axe, the implicit things that you get on the axe and the mace are overpower damage and damage to healthy enemies. I think these are just objectively worse than critical strike damage. And this one can still roll more critical strike damage on the affixes. So I don't even look at getting an axe and getting a mace. Unless there's some build out there that has it. It's very specific. I would say for every single build I've done so far on Barbarian, I've always gone with a bladed one-hander because of the critical strike damage. Then for the modifiers, very similar. We're just looking for damage. We're looking for crit. We're looking for vulnerable. We're looking for, then now we can go damage 2. And we have the same situation here. Same kind of breakdown. 14% only to bleeding, 16% to crowd control, but then 35% to injured. But who cares about injured? Because they're almost dead anyway. We want the damage in the first portion. So then out of these 23.5s, what's the best? I'm going close. Then after that, it's up to you if you want to go damage percentage, stuff like that. You're only getting 63 strength here and all stats. So I would say based on what you have, it's either going to be the strength. Maybe if you're pushing up in your Paragon tree, you're missing a few core stats you need for a particular node. So maybe you need to push dexterity or willpower or something like that. In that situation, that's going to be very dependent to you, but these are going to be the core things you're always going to want regardless of that. So damage 2, then I would say damage to slowed. You know, a lot of people are doing whirlwind with hamstring. That's a very easy thing to accomplish on a barbarian. In the purposes of just general good stuff, I'm going strength. I'm thinking strength is going to be the move. Basically duplicate that for the next one. And then over here, this is Grandfather. I don't think anyone has dropped this yet. I don't know if this is in the game. Fields of Crimson, this is going to be, don't even bother running the Rupture build if you don't have this. And then I haven't seen anyone actually non-ironically use a Ranks of Steel Grasp axe yet, but it'd be very cool. Like, I could imagine this being a PvP thing. If you care about PvP and you have this guy, it'd be really annoying to play against someone like this that is like full tanky and he's just pulling everyone in. You know, that'd actually be kind of funny. So then from here, same implicit issue as before. You have the critical strike damage, you have damage to healthy and damage to injured. I think we can all agree that critical strike is going to be the move there. So two-handed blading is going to be, the two-handed bladed sword is going to be the best there. Then modifiers, same situation here. We're going to be going with crit. We're going to be going with vulnerable. And we're going to be going with, those are going to be the 3 best. And then the same choice you have here. Just keep in mind that's the God roll. And then you can roll for whatever the hell you want on the 4th one. This is where it gets a little interesting. There's these 2 here when it comes to uniques. So you have, I'm not the biggest fan of these. Maybe there's going to be specific builds that actually care about having, if a core skill hits 5 or more enemies, 20 to 40% of the resource cost is refunded. That actually sounds pretty good, to be honest. But what doesn't sound good, the wasted stat here of the overpower damage. That's one that's wasted. And depending on the build, the lucky hit chance could be wasted, or it could actually be really sought after, for example, the Rupture build. And then you have the all stats, which I think is solid, and the critical strike damage, which is fantastic. But you're missing out on a lot of stuff, which we'll talk about here. These are all just random. When it comes to it, nothing to see there. Implicit modifiers at the moment, resistances are pretty worthless, so who cares? It'd be cool in the future if something like this can actually matter and the choice would be something we care about, but at the moment we don't. So then this is going to be very similar. I would say on these pieces, depending on your build, so resource regeneration, this is going to be the #1 stat for your rings. You want these on both your rings ideally if you can. Then I'm thinking crit. I think crit chance is fantastic depending on the build, especially if you're running Hoda. You really want to have crit chance on these. I'd say both of these are going to be fantastic for your rings. Then from there, you can go crit damage and vulnerable, but that would be the general really good build. But depending on the build, something that I would consider, and depending on how you roll it, what you're looking for, you may want to consider a couple other things. You may want to consider lucky hit chance. This is one of the few places you can get it on your gloves and on your ranks could really make or break a build. And then also maximum fury. I would say this is something that you really want to consider because this is going to be one of the few places you can get it, or on the headpiece. This is one of the other few places you can get it. Keep that in mind that these are rare things that can only be found here. So yes, you might lose a little damage, but the maximum fury could end up making the build do more damage with other modifiers. That is something to keep in mind. And then lastly, it's going to be the neck piece. These are going to be very specific depending, like for example, battle trance. This is very specific to some kind of frenzy build. And this right here, I feel like this is like Jaco level. Like this would be insane, but I've never pulled it. So let's go with the amulet. So the neck piece is by far the hardest thing to decide in what's the best. And I think there's not going to be a 100% fit all answer here for the best neck piece, because the neck ends up taking the options of the best parts of multiple pieces of gear and then gives it all for the neck too. That is a possible role potential here. So depending on what you're trying to do, it could change massively. But for the most part, I would say the things that you can safely get on your neck piece that are going to be good. Cooldown reduction is fantastic. This is probably the best overall stat period on a barbarian. Fury cost reduction is not far behind that. Movement speed is always generally good. But then there's so many other things here that you could potentially get that you might want to mix and match some of these. Maybe you don't care about movement speed that much. Maybe you're totally fine on fury cost and you could take advantage of these other things. A lot of these I'm going to point out that were really good on the other pieces. I really value this one. Ranks of all defensive skills. It is going to be increasing. Not only does it increase your rallying cry up to 2 to 3 ranks, it increases your challenging shout, and then it also can boost up iron skin and ground sound. These are all things that are very core to a ton of barbarian builds. You can't go wrong with that affix. But then there's so many other things you can totally get, and you're probably not going to be able to find this perfect combination, or if you do, it's going to be very rare. There's so many other things that are really good. You got strength percentage or like main stat percentages here. You have total armor that I think would be fantastic. Damage reduction when fortified is going to be really good. You also have just basically all the damage reduction abilities of your chest piece. So there's so many things that are really good. And then one thing that only exists on the rings that you can't get on the neck piece that would be really good is going to be resource generation. That these are going to be the best things you can find on the amulet. They are very similar to some of the best things you can get on every other piece, but that is going to be the one thing that you can't get. And also just straight up damage stuff too. You can't get there, like the vulnerable damage, critical strike damage. I think this planner is fantastic, and it really puts into perspective of what you can actually get on each piece, and then also the main or the best roles of that particular piece. So you can really gauge not only having a plan, but when you actually finally get that role, how good it is and if there's something better out there. So this really helps a ton. Hopefully this has simplified the process for you guys. These are going to be the things that are going to be good on every build. And then depending on what you're trying to do or the specific things you're trying to do, you can simplify that from there.